Let's talk Tanya for the 25th of Sivan. Yesterday, we spoke about Mimali Kalalman, the light of God, which contracts itself in order to be able to create all the worlds and the many different finite creations in all the worlds. What is the process of this contraction? So in today's Tanya, the Alter Rebbe explains everything begins with God's breath. We spoke about that the source of this world is the Asara Mamoris, the 10 utterances. The fact that we are able to speak and say words, the source of that is the breath that we exhale while we are speaking. The breath of God, which is the source of the words, is directly sourced in God's attributes, His kindness, His severity, etc. And because God's attributes are infinite, God's breath is also infinite. So if the world were to have been created directly from God's breath, there would have been two results. Number one, there would have been an infinite amount of worlds. And number two, every single world qualitatively also would have been infinite. We would not have had our world, which is a finite world, because the worlds would also, all of them, all the infinite worlds would be infinite also qualitatively. So therefore, the first contraction that has to happen is we have to have the 10 utterances. The 10 utterances, they take God's breath and they very clearly delineate them. Yehi Or, let there be light. Yehi Rakia, let there be heavens. We're taking an infinite light, which is the breath of God, and we are confining it and contracting it and limiting it to a very specific and certain creation. Now, this works for the greater, grander creation, such as the heavens, such as the seas, such as the general creation of various species. And that's why there are only 10 utterances. The energy which is within these 10 utterances is still way too intense for the average run-of-the-mill everyday creation. For that, there's another process which we touched upon briefly in the first chapter of Shar Yichud V'Amunah, which is called Sirufim, Chilufim, Tmuris, and Gematria, which basically means that of these 10 utterances, we take out a letter from over here, a letter from over here, a letter from this word and from that word, we put it together, we make a new word. That's called Sirufim. And once we do that, obviously, the light, the energy is being diluted. It's not the original word. We're taking a little piece of this word, a little piece of that word, a little piece of the energy, putting it together to create a new energy, not nearly as potent. Then we have the idea of tmuris, exchanging letters for similar letters or letters that are in a similar grouping, which we've spoken about. Then there's the idea of gematria, which is that sometimes we have the numerical value of one word becomes the numerical value of another, and that is an absolute dilution of the energy. There is very little in common between this word and that word, other than the fact that they share the same numerical value. And the lowest of creations, the most simplest of creations, are created by way of gematria. And by the way, sometimes we have a combination. We can have a word that is created through a tziruf, through grabbing different letters, and then we exchange some of those letters for other letters. Then we do a gematria, and you realize just how diluted and how contracted the energy would be in the end product. Now, even the very lowest energy ultimately is divine energy. And that's why, let's take, for example, the energy which certainly comes from gematria and perhaps others also with tzirufim and chilufim and temuris, all these processes compounded and put together to create a stone. It's a very diluted energy, proof being that what is being created, an inanimate object. However, this energy, because it is divine, therefore it has the power to make an infinite amount of stones. However, each one of the stones that it creates is going to be inanimate and it's going to be very limited in that which it is. So to recap where we are, we finished now chapter 7 of Shar Yichud V'Amunah. We spent a few chapters speaking about God's unity and how all of creation does not contradict the idea that Ein Od Milvado, there's nothing other than God. We spoke about the idea of Yechuda Ilah, Yechuda Tata, the two different perspectives of God's unity, higher level of unity, lower level of unity. We spoke about the idea of Tzimtzum Sholei Kipshutai, that the understanding of God's unity also leads us to understand that when Kabbalah talks about contractions, it doesn't mean it literally, because if it were to mean it literally, then there is something other than God, His knowledge of that which is going on outside of Him. We moved on from there to talk about Soivav Kalalman and Mamala Kalalman, the two different types of light of God. And with this, we've concluded the topic. Creation no longer poses a challenge to God's unity. Over the next chapters of Shar Yichud V'Amunah, we are going to, right now, move our focus. Creation doesn't pose a challenge to God's unity. But how about God's many attributes and qualities? How can we truly say that God is one? If there's God, there's His wisdom, there's His will, there's His kindness. That will be the topic in the upcoming chapters of Shar Yichud Ve'emunah.